The title is not hyperbole. It was that good. Now, is this subject to recency bias? Undoubtedly. But did I go into this with so-so expectations before being blown away by the first, second, third, and every subsequent scene for 130 minutes? Also undoubtedly. We are dropped into a very realized, fleshed out world. Superman has enemies, he's got allies, and he's even got some controversies. The tech scroll at the beginning felt both very natural and very charming, and I liked being introduced to our Superman in a moment where he's at his lowest. We get to see his determination, his courage, and also Crypto being a terrible dog, but a wonderful dog. An immediate look into his Fortress of Solitude tells us a lot about him, from the way he treats those around him, what gives him some of his courage, and where his priorities lie. The entire cast truly embodies their characters excellently, but David Cornsweet very quickly and thankfully gives us that feeling. Oh yeah, this is Superman. And only a few actors have been able to nail that feeling right out of the gate. He's young, experienced, but still very much learning. He's flawed, naive, headstrong in a way. He gets so much personality and characterization during the first chunk of this film that prior iterations have failed at over the course of entire franchises. And that's not just a shot at Zack Snyder, it's also massive props to James Gunn for injecting this superhero with the sort of lovable and human charisma that he's always had. And would you believe me if I said Superman was only like my fifth favorite character? Not really, but Mr. Terrific and Guy Gardner are just stupendous. Scene stealing, they feel exactly like James Gunn iterations, and I say that in a very good way. Hawkgirl does round out the Justice Gang nicely while being notably less prominent, but certainly she's overshadowed by these two genuine behemoths. One playing a large role in the film and getting better with every moment, and one just popping in every now and then to steal the show and retreat back into the shadows. Lois Lane is perfect. Rachel Brosnahan plays her with so much charm and charisma, and I want to see her continue to grow and evolve with this franchise almost as much as I want to see Superman. Everything about her was just great. On her own, her dynamic in the Daily Planet, her complex relationship with Clark, this is just a gorgeous iteration, played and written perfectly. I genuinely would love a show or even a film centered around the Daily Planet, and it almost feels as though they want us thinking that way, seeing as how much time we spent there and how colorful of a cast we were given. The film feels like we're being dropped into a pre-existing world, and that feeling is doubled down on when we get a lengthy scene between Lois and Clark where she interviews him as Superman. So much emotional and relationship exploration here. A look into the way both of them view the world and the act of heroism itself. Lois is playing contrarian, but very much echoing some of her own genuine sentiments. And we see Superman grow flustered and frustrated when he doesn't have the answers he thought he would. Perhaps one of the very finest scenes in the whole film. But of course, the true best character is Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. Are you fucking kidding me? Never was I truly doubtful as a big Nicholas Hoult fan, but I never really bought into the hype during production nor during the movie's first few days. But my god, he's better than people are saying. For whatever piece of outrageous hyperbole I drop in this review, believe me when I say Nicholas Hoult is one of the best comic book villains of all time. Is my title claim that this movie is one of the best ever a bit much? Probably. But my Nicholas Hoult claim? Not a fucking chance. This shit's instant god tier. So much personality packed into every line, every look, every action. He's such a nasty little hater, a diabolical and evil supervillain. Remember when we used to get supervillains who weren't fighting an entire squadron of heroes? This film wears its Sam Raimi Spider-Man influences quietly on its sleeve, and Superman and Luthor's relationship reminds me a lot of Spider-Man and Green Goblins with just how personal it is. I also think the world of Metropolis felt very similar to Spider-Man's New York in regards to the citizens and how they react and converse with Superman. He has conversations with them on the street. They accuse him of things and thank him for saving them, and he responds like a person would. He saves a dog when he didn't have to, a squirrel. He saves people constantly, and the film makes a point of it very early on to tell us that Superman wants to save people first and foremost. Damn what else might come next. It's naive and immature, but it's his worldview and it's wonderfully realized. And despite not having a super clear arc, he does have subtle moments of progression, such as not rushing to save Yaranpur when Baravia attacks him in the film's final act because Mr. Terrific needs his help. The Clark at the start of the film might have been more inclined to go fight the evil he does know, that he was already involved in, as opposed to fighting against the evil he doesn't know. It's small, but there's something. I can't believe how dark they went in the pocket dimension. The visuals were insane, the little demons steering the cart? Holy hell. Something about seeing Lex converse and boss around a little gremlin goblin like that just tickled me in the perfect way. Lex treating Squiggleman as yet another pawn to do his bidding, not a real person with feelings and a heart. Just perfect. Clark half escapes because he appeals to his sensibilities as a father with kindness, and half because this man sees how despicable Lex is and wants to go against him. I think the lack of depth given to this pocket dimension befits the world's lack of confusion regarding the things that they are used to that we're not, but it also plays a role in one of my minor gripes with the film, just how overstuffed it can feel at times. It adds a lot in immersion, and on their own I think almost every aspect works well. The Daily Planet, the Justice Gang, Clark and Lois' relationship, Lex Luthor's desire to overthrow Superman, the war between Baravia and Yaranpur, Clark's parents on their ranch, the Fortress of Solitude, Jimmy being the most desirable man in Metropolis, Crypto. That's a lot of shit when you lay it out like that, huh? This movie almost felt like a sequel in a way, one that felt like it had to go bigger and bolder than the last one to surpass its predecessor. This isn't bad per se, but I think it can affect the overall pacing and storytelling when we're not able to give certain moments as much time to breathe, such as maybe the pocket dimension. Superman himself notably gets less screen time than I would have expected, and I think that did hurt the overall movie. The visuals, however, were gorgeous. The initial footage had a wonderfully bright and colorful tone to it, and then subsequent footage seemed more muted, more like what audience have grown grown sadly used to, but I'm very pleased to say the final result is far more representative of the former. Thematically, the brightness represents the hope and optimism Superman brings this world, but on a simpler note than that, it's just fun to fucking look at. Gray movies really need to get out of here, man. Not to rag on the DCEU, but in contrast, their desire for that dark and gritty realism resulted in a Metropolis that evoked none of those feelings. It's hard to blame the DCEU for opting for that route back then, what with the massive success of the MCU while employing a lighter tone, and the recent success of Christopher Nolan's dark and gritty Batman trilogy, it did make sense to try to carve out their own path and make themselves distinct from the MCU while doing something general audiences have already proven they like in the DC universe. I don't think on paper that was the problem, it was more about the execution. But in any case, Superman and Metropolis always should have been the outlier, where colors and hope lived and breathed. Thank God the new DCU clearly understands this. Pairing gorgeously with the colorful visuals was a very dynamic camera, something the superhero genre in particular has always struggled with. The action wasn't necessarily choreographed all that well or creatively, but the audio and camera work made it feel so impactful. A bit reminiscent of the Batman, to be honest, but on a notably different power scale. Superman's first flying scene as he leaves his fortress likewise benefited intensely from a camera that bounced and rolled with him, while the audio made us feel like we were flying alongside him. I actually think the audio did the brunt of the heavy lifting there, but they worked very harmoniously in tandem. Besides bringing us more of an impactful and dynamic feel, it also helped it feel like an actual comic book. The pacing and storytelling aided in that as well. Yes, at times it could feel a bit overstuffed, but it also felt episodic in a way. How Clark would bounce from his fortress to a fight in a Metropolis with something humanoid, then he's fighting a kaiju, then he's in a sci-fi prison hellhole. Lex Luthor's ruining his fucking life. He's meeting crazy guys with crazy powers and crazy personalities, and here's the dog, here's his parents, here's Smallville, here's Lois. Now we got the whole Daily Planet, fleshed out and charismatic as shit. As I wrote this script, I couldn't decide if how overstuffed this movie was ended up being a good thing or a bad thing, since it did give us such a unique and wonderful comic book feel. I think some scenes needed more time to breathe, Superman and Clark could have used a few more scenes, but I'm glad they went with this narrative approach. Jimmy Olsen was wonderful. His effect on women was played as a fun gag, but the fact that it ended up having large plot implications was just lovely. Likewise with Eve taking selfies in the trailer. When she sent him all the selfies, my fiance correctly guessed there'd be info in the background of her shots, which was so clever of both her and the movie. When Lex killed that guy and said he'd bring in the reporter Superman's always talking to, Clark Kent. Even cleverer, making us think it was Lois for a half second, but also gave us some insight into the way Lex works. For all his genius, he hasn't considered Clark being Superman. That's just some lowly reporter after all, not a legitimate threat to billionaire genius Lex Luthor. Yes, I know the hypno glasses and all, but that was a pretty soft explanation and one that I'm not sure was needed. If you're gonna wisely go with the silly comic book trunks, then just stick with Clark Kent being the disguise. The way the actor gets to handle portraying both roles I think is a big part of the character. And that would be a bit of a gripe I had with the movie too. Clark and Superman felt almost exactly the same, and we didn't get nearly enough time with Clark interacting with people for these two identities to become more distinct. But if these are the only gripes I can muster, then holy hell was it ever solid. From start to finish, this was a ride I enjoyed every minute of, and my hope and optimism towards the new DCU could not be higher. Subscribe if you like this sort of stuff and want to help support the channel, and take care. Until next time.